Okay, then we're now going to move on to our first panel, which is on redefining the business case for LGBT inclusion. So this is sort of revisiting the topic of our first event from 2 years ago and looking at what's changed, both internally and externally. And to discuss this, I'm very glad to be joined by David Almeida, who is the Chief People Officer at Anheuser-Busch InBev, by Tony Profit, who's the Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce, and by Robin Diamonte, who is the Chief Investment Officer at United Technologies. Please welcome our panelists.
Thank you.
Right. I think, David, I might start with you because our theme today is moving from this embassy model to the advocate model, and AB InBev is a big company, operates in lots of countries with a lot of very, very different political and social environments. So where would you say you are? Are you on the kind of embassy, towards the embassy position? Are you moving towards the advocate position?
I think we're moving towards the advocate position, and I think it's critical that we understand that why we're doing it. I think the whole point for us is a question of authenticity. I think for those who don't know us, AB InBev, as you said, is in 50 countries and big business, #1 beer company in the world, and we've been known for a very strong culture, a culture that says we want to bring people together for a better world, and want to bring all people together for a better world.
With beer.
With beer.
Absolutely.
Beer brings people together, right?
Absolutely.
That's why we're here, right?
I mean, since ancient Mesopotamia.
Exactly,
hooray for beer.
Exactly, yeah. Beer brings people together, right? So I think it's driving diversity and inclusion is consistent with our culture. So that's the first reason we need to do this. The second thing is there's rational reasons why we need to drive diversity and inclusion. We understand that our people are what drive our success. And talent's everywhere, right? So if we want to have a diverse workforce, we want to drive better results, we need to have diversity, and inclusion is a huge part of that. So we believe that we need to make change, and I think that's critical for how we want to succeed.
Brilliant. Now, you mentioned the word authenticity right there in the first minute of the panel, which is a good opportunity for me to mention this poll that we have. So we have a series of questions throughout the day that we've already asked our audience on social media, on Twitter, and we're going to ask you the same question. And at the end of the panel, we're going to show what your answer was and what the Twitter audience's answer was. So please can we have the first question, which touches on this directly. Here we go. We're not being shown the two answers here. It's what do you think of companies advocating for LGBT rights? And I think the question is whether it's basically, I think you've got various options, but one of them is it's all just PR. And the question is to what extent you agree or disagree with that question. So please have a look on the app. I think the app is giving you a sort of multiple choice. But that's something I will be asking all of our panelists. What do you say when people say this is just PR?
Yeah, I think it's critical that it's not just PR. As I said, I think we believe that there's all kinds of research that shows that a diverse workforce is one that drives better results, right? And I think, as I said, inclusion is critical to that diversity. So if we want to have a diverse workforce, we need inclusion. And I think we've shown through many ways that our brands, which I think the most powerful way we can communicate our support for LGBT is our brands. We have big consumer brands with billions of impressions yearly. So you see brands like, for example, Bud Light in the U.S., which has supported the Pride Parade since 1995. You see Skol in Brazil, which was one of the top 3 beer brands in the world, also supporting the Pride Parade in Brazil. So I think the best way that we as a consumer goods company, fast-moving consumer goods company, can really make a stand is through our brands, and I think we've done it pretty well.
And obviously, those are campaigns I think people are quite familiar with. But a different situation pertains in some of your other markets. So you might have a more conservative view of these matters, shall we say, or a more restrictive view of these matters in some African markets, for example. So are you doing anything in the advertising realm in those markets along these lines?
Sure. I think the first thing is that given our scale, we can truly make an impact. And if you look at other facets of the business, if you look at areas where our policies we have, processes we have get adopted by the industry, I think here we can as well. So for example, one thing we just did recently was we just issued actually the day before yesterday, a new parental leave policy, right? And this new parental leave policy, one of the unique things we can do is we can do it globally. It's not just the US, it's not one market around the world. So in many markets around the world, we actually went above and beyond statutory minimums, right? So parental leave in Africa, most countries, the statutory minimum is well below what we just implemented, right? So I think we can lead by example in ways that are great. I think that's one thing. So as a big company, when we raise the bar globally, we can make a global impact. And the second thing is, we do not tolerate. There's company culture and there's country culture. Our company culture does not tolerate harassment, discrimination, right? So independent of what exists in country culture, there's hotlines, there's ways that people can reach out if there are issues, and we will address them internally.
Okay, so is it fair to say you're still more in the embassy position in some of those markets, but you've moved on to the advocacy position in places like the US and Brazil? Is that?
Yeah, I think we're being very pragmatic. To be honest with you, we're being very, very pragmatic in the sense of doing what's right within what we can. And we think in those countries where, for example, there are issues that need to be addressed, being at the table is critical. Being able to make that impact is critical. It would be much worse if we weren't there, because then we could not be a positive agent for change.
Brilliant. Okay, Tony, I'd like to come to you now. So your title is unusual because you're Chief Equality Officer, rather than, I think people will be familiar with Diversity and Inclusion Officers. So what's the difference? Is it broader? Is it focused on something in particular? What's the difference between those two roles?
Yeah, so you think about diversity and inclusion as typically being focused on what's happening within the enterprise. And for us at Salesforce, we believe we have a responsibility, that we have been blessed with a platform by our partners and our customers and society at large to use that platform for good. And so within that frame, we think we have a responsibility to stand for the rights of our employees and their families and our partners and their customers in the communities where we operate around the world. And so that's the equality dimension. So we're not just focused on building a great place to work, but also making sure that when our employees step outside of our four walls, that we're also advocating for their rights in the community at large.
And that is the classic advocate position. So Salesforce operates in lots of countries around the world, like AB InBev does. Can you give us some examples of practical things you've done in particular countries in the same way that we just heard from David?
I'll start right here.
Right.
Start right here in the U.S. And I take no credit for any of this. I didn't work for Salesforce when many of these initiatives were started. But you look back just a few years and you look at some of the discriminatory legislation that has been passed in various states, including Indiana, and Salesforce was among the first to stand up against that discriminatory legislation in Indiana. And likewise, with many other great institutions and corporations in North Carolina and Texas and in Georgia, and standing for the rights of our employees and their families to make sure that they weren't just safe and included inside the workplace, but they were safe and included and welcome and could be their authentic self, walking down the streets of Indianapolis. And so that's an example. I'll offer another example. We'll go from Indiana to India. And so this year, we launched Outforce, which is our LGBTQ employee resource group, Outforce, in India. And for those of you that are familiar with India, you know that while we don't have all the rights and protections that we need here in the US, certainly for LGBTQ people, in India there are even fewer. And so we began that process by marching in the Pride Parade in Hyderabad to stand for the rights of LGBTQ people, both at Salesforce and in the broader community in Hyderabad and India at large. Problem was, nobody was out in our office. No one was out. And so in this process, this was just a few months ago, one person came out. And in the midst of an employee town hall, this person came out, and the emotion and the tears that everyone, the response to that, the empathy that it evoked of the folks listening was overwhelming. And you think about that one person, and everyone in the room, we all have these tapes playing. I have tapes playing. Now, did that happen because I was black, or did that happen because I just messed that up, right? So imagine, spending every day trying not to out yourself. How much of your mental energy, 10, 20, 30, 40% of your brain, taxed by, what did I tell that person the last time? And what am I going to tell them this time when they ask about my relationships or the weekend or my activities or my interests, right? In that moment when that person came out, that person was free. And so you think about that, and that's true for anyone. For the opportunity to be your full authentic self at work in that moment when you can do that, all that processing, all those CPU power in the back of your brain, not to contradict or out yourself or worrying about that happened because of some aspect of my identity, that's all freed up. And so that is the value. And so those are some examples. There's a few more, but there's one I will leave you with, Tom.
That analogy with processor cycles is what we would expect from a technology company, but you also used the word platform earlier on. Did you mean platform in the sense that it's used in the tech industry, which is because obviously you have your software on a lot of people's desks and phones, and or do you mean more generally a platform in society, or both?
I think when we think about it, we think about it metaphorically and also at times literally, right? But for any company here, because then the question would become, if you said it's literally just a technology platform, then what's the role of a non-technology company? First, I would argue that every company is becoming it, whether you want to or not, every company is becoming a technology company today's day. You're not going to be successful, without having technology, inbred into your business processes and all of your activities. And your platform is just simply your voice. It could be your social media platform. It could be your marketing platform. It could be your brand. It could be your influence in community. It could be your philanthropy. Right? These are all aspects of your platform. And again, I say this with a preface of, there's no pretense that we're perfect and we have all the answers. We certainly are fallible. But we work hard every day to recenter on that North Star of using our platform for the betterment of society, and certainly to stand for the rights of LGBTQ people around the world, wherever country or city where we operate.
Great, thank you. Robin, I'd like to come to you. So you are not a diversity officer or anything like that. You're a chief investment officer. So you have a different perspective on this. Tell us how this fits in, just as a senior executive at a very large company. What does this mean to you as part of your role from day to day?
Sure. So United Technologies, very large industrial conglomerate, and built on mostly engineers, white, heterosexual, conservative corporate America. And I came in about 14 years ago as a lesbian, and I know firsthand when Tony talked about using all your energy to not identify yourself, because I came into the workforce in the late, early 90s. So it was a very different world then. So I spent a good portion of my time and my energy watching my pronouns, hiding from my peers and my supervisors, my lifestyle and who I was. And I made it a point to say, people have to get to know me really well before I would come out to them, because I wanted them to make sure that they knew that I was bright and I had a great work ethic and I was moral and I had great values before I would actually introduce who I was. So when I decided to take the job at UTC, it was different. I was going to be hired in as an executive. And it's interesting that when you are later on in your career, you have a lot more bravery and you have credentials. And I said, I am not going to work for a company that this is going to be an issue for. So I made sure that the treasurer and the CFO knew exactly who I was, and I actually gauged and looked at their faces when I came out just to make sure that this was an environment. And I talked about domestic benefits. And luckily, it was a place that I felt that I could belong. And they've gave me that sense of belonging. But more importantly, in finance, what we realized is that we really needed to, we talked about the digital age, and we all have to, it's a global country, that talent was so important and that we couldn't waste talent. And we have done a lot of work with diversity. I call it the Noah Ark syndrome of trying to get two of every kind and throw them in a room and hope that they prosper. But that doesn't work, So what I started to do was I'm an executive sponsor of something called the Inclusion Forum. And basically what we do is we have a couple of different committees. One committee is really focused on training and awareness. So it's about having people understand unconscious biases. People don't know what they don't know. Sometimes they have really good intent, but trying to understand them and minimize them. We would have, last month we had a training session on LGBTQ and the differences between gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. And we even talk of things about millennials versus baby boomers or extroverts versus introverts. So it's really about inclusion. And then the second committee is more about building inclusion champions. How can leaders be inclusive, and what are the tools that people can have to be inclusion champions?
And what's some examples of that? How can leaders be good LGBT allies, and what are the tools at their disposal for that?
What we try to tell people is that we're not trying to change their personal views, right? What we're trying to do is change their behaviors. And we stress that this is a UTC policy and that we need to treat people with respect. And we encourage people to be curious and to learn about other cultures and talk to people and step outside of their comfort zone. We also say not to be a bystander. And when you hear that people are being discriminated, to stand out against that and to make a point of using what we call go-to people. So look in your organization and don't always use the same 10% of the people to give your high-profile projects. Go to a person that may be different from you. Mm-hmm. Mentor and, more importantly, coach and sponsor people that are different from you. So those are the types of tools that we try to give leaders.
David, did you want to come in there?
I was
How do you think, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I was going to say that just the comment about Noah's Ark I think is great. I think, this whole idea of just this, sometimes there's an anxiety to see, as part of this whole D&I agenda, to see results immediately. We want to see representation immediately. The reality is, in some cases, that might not work. What happens is you have to really do a data-driven approach to understand what are the root causes of why we don't have the representation we need, and work on those, right? So, for example, she mentioned unconscious bias training. We do a process internally, which is a key people process we do. Every year, we assess our people formally, thousands of meetings around the world. And last year, for the first time, at the start of all of those meetings, we did the unconscious bias training. So before we do, it's a full-day meeting. Before we do the full-day meeting, 2-hour session, teaching people how to accept that they have bias, how to mitigate, and how to address, right? So that's those kind of changes. So going to the process and seeing what we can do to improve them is where I think we can make a big impact.
So, go ahead.
I want to just underscore just a couple things that Robin said. And first, this notion that we would presume that everyone around us has just a basic level of understanding, even what we're talking about. But I just think the fundamentals of that basic education of this is sexual orientation and this is gender identity, and just so that people have even the right vocabulary, I think is hugely important, and not presuming that the folks around us, and just arming them with just the basic knowledge just to be able to interact and use the right words and the right pronouns. It's just, I think it's just a fundamental basic hygiene to allow for an inclusive culture. I think, first of all, so many things you said were amazing and beautiful and inspiring. I love that, but I think that was one I really want to underline. I think it's super important to start from that basic level to empower certainly executives.
And are there other things that, what's your view on what senior executives can do? Because you've had leadership in your company very visibly right from the top on this. But what else do you think senior executives need to do?
Be an ally. Be an ally.
And what does that mean in practice?
Okay, I'll just give you just a couple examples. First thing I'd say it means in practice is being someone's ally doesn't mean that you agree on everything. And you said it, Robin, and again, I love that too. You said it doesn't mean you're not going to ask someone to change their religious affiliation if they have one. You're not going to ask them to change their political party, right? If you think about a company or any institution as a family, and if any family has more than one person in it, you're not always going to agree on everything, but you're going to stand together as a family and be there for your siblings, your brothers, sisters, siblings as an ally. So one example is just show up for pride. And showing for pride, again, doesn't mean that you agree on every single political issue or every single lifestyle choice, but it just says, I'm showing my alliance to this individual or this group of individuals, and I'm there to be there for you and support you as a member of your family. Now, for me personally, this notion of being an ally is super, super important, and it was one that was imprinted on me by my son. And so about 3 years ago, my son went off to college, and kind of early days of college, we show up at the QRC, the Queer Resource Center, at his university, and he gives me this button, and I carry this button with me literally to this day. Everywhere I go in the world, I carry this button with me. It just simply says, name of his college, Ally, Queer Resource Center. Just put this on. And in putting it on, there's something powerful about making a public declaration of being somebody's ally. And you start to now measure everything that you're doing and everything that you're saying and everything that you're thinking, against that standard of this public declaration, it's super, super powerful. So the idea of declaring yourself an ally, acting like an ally, using that as a higher purpose to guide you and start to measure your behaviors and your actions and your words and your thoughts against that standard, I think is a super important. It's a constructive way for executives and for everyone down to the front lines to become more empathic and have a higher impact and build a more inclusive workplace.
Thank you. Robin, I asked our other two panelists this, and I didn't ask you, so I'm going to ask you now, where you sit on the embassy versus advocate, or maybe not versus, but where you are on the spectrum, because obviously United operates in a lot of countries around the world.
We do. We're in we're 78 countries around the world, and I think it's been slow at going, and more of an embassy role. Our CEO is taking a very strong line, and he signed up for Paradigm for Parity. For people that are not familiar with that, that is to say, making a pledge to have 50% women at senior level positions globally by 2030. And that's a pretty brave move. So we try with our policies and our training around the world. So everyone needs to take anti-harassment training. When we onboard people, we talk about policies, and we're very clear about in our EEOC about gender expression and gender identity in all of our training and on our benefits. So we have transgender benefits. We have domestic partnership benefits.
And that applies globally, is the point.
It applies globally. So, it's more about policy setting at this point and trying to train leadership and set objectives at high levels than it is about going out and being advocates at this point.
Okay. And I suppose if you look at Salesforce, we had the example of where the CEO, took a public stand against the laws that were on the books in some parts of the US. Has there been a similar case for United yet, where you've had to take a stand within this country before we start thinking about other countries?
Yeah, because my full-time job is investing retirement assets. I don't know. Not that I've heard of, to be honest.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay. Now we've heard from both Robin and from David the argument that we heard 2 years ago, the sort of classic benefits of diversity and inclusion for business, making the most of the talent that you have, not closing yourself off to anyone, having a workforce that reflects the makeup of your of your customers, and so forth and so forth. What I wanted to ask all of you was the extent to which the focus on rights and on diversity and inclusion is shifting from an internal discussion about the environment inside the company. Is it fair to say that there's now more emphasis on the external, or have they always been there? I just wanted a sense of whether the debate has moved on in the 2 years since we first talked about it on this stage.
I'll take it first. I think if I look at the progress over the past couple of years, I think it's remarkable. I think obviously, driving diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do, but I think the coming to the forefront of all the research that talks about the benefits of diversity, the business value, and all of that, I think has accelerated. So if you look at the past 2 years, the change that's gone on in my company, even before I've taken the chief people role, I think it's remarkable. We have a leadership meeting around the world. We bring our top 250 leaders from around the world, and the first time we formally addressed kind of diversity in a big way was 18 months ago. Was the first meeting, and I think since then we've made significant traction. So. And of course, our company, it's about ownership. So the CEO, Brito, taking ownership of the agenda. Again, in this year's meeting, we have 200 people from around the world. It was, I'd say 30% of the meeting was dedicated towards we need to drive diversity and inclusion because it's good for results. It's the right thing to do, and it's good for results. And then we do follow-on meetings to that global meeting in all of our 9 zones. And again, in each of those meetings, 30% of the topic was discussed on that. So I think it's something that's building very, very quickly. And people are realizing that it's something that fits perfectly with our culture, and something that's going to help us be a much better company, right? So I'm really pleased with the progress we made over 2 years, but it's a journey, right? It's not going to happen overnight, right? And we're going to make progress kind of over time.
What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I would say if you think about how the world has evolved over the last several decades, there's hardly a bright line of when this started, but from this relationship between citizens and government and a free press to some vacuums emerging in that relationship, vacuums of leadership, and then the influence that corporations have around the world to make a difference. And so the importance now in a world where people have coined it kind of this polycentric world, where corporations have an opportunity, and I would argue a responsibility, to take a stand and to be a force for good in this world, as do NGOs, in creating this polycentric world. And so we certainly believe that at Salesforce, and from our board and our CEO and the leaders of the company to the front lines. I think we work hard, again, imperfectly, and we have challenges, as does any company, any corporation, particularly in the tech industry, but we work hard to be a positive force.
But the imperative to be a positive force outside the walls of the company is greater now.
It is, absolutely, and I think more and more, whether you work in B2B, business to business, B2C, business to consumer, your customers are demanding it. I mean, you think about, personally, the brand choices that you make and the brands that you associate yourself with, and you're more and more, and not just millennials, I'm a baby boomer, folks of all generations are looking to be aligned with brands where their values are aligned with their own. We're given a choice between 2 brands, and one has values that are unstated or ambiguous, and one has values that are clearly aligned with your own, the choice is super obvious. So it's harder and harder for any entity, particularly a corporation, to stand on the sidelines and not speak actively of what does your company stand for.
Robin, United is primarily a B2B, well, it is a B2B company, right? I mean, when I get on a plane, I'm not looking at who made the engine. So,
Right.
Well, actually I do.
It's for carrier.
Right, but I mean, I think we're familiar with the idea that B2C companies are going to be judged by their customers and where they stand on these issues.
Yeah.
What does that mean for a B2B company? Is there any kind of mechanism for?
It's not, in all honesty, it's not driven by our customers, because even part of our customer base is the government. It's really more driven about people, talent, innovation, and growth. And having the reputation out there to be a company that is inclusive and that you want to go work for to retain that talent. We talk about, especially in the LGBT community, we're a very loyal group. And, there's been studies that actually show 9 out of 10 people actually go and support a company that is LGBT friendly, and 30% of us will actually change, even if it's not convenient, to go and buy a brand to a company that is LGBT friendly. And we know that it's legally, there's a lot of cost to having a reputation or taking care of discrimination suits. So there's a really good business reason beside just the customers and the talent that you want to sort of embrace this type of culture.
So we have one thing in common. We have many things in common, but one particular thing. I used to work for UTC. I joined there in 2001. And just unsolicited, I want to say, as a black man working at UTC, I loved working there. I felt got where I was based on merit. I felt included. I felt respected by the leaders up to the CEO. And so my experience there as a black man was exceptional. And I look back on it fondly, and I love the company and love the leaders there. So.
Great. Well, I'd like to open things up to the floor now. So do we have any questions from you for our panelists on this whole question of the business case and how that case is evolving? Who would like to go first? We have a question over here. There's a microphone.
Thanks. Question for Anheuser-Busch. Has any of your pro-gay advertising come back at you? Has anyone said, okay, we're going to blacklist you and boycott you from any religious or conservative organizations?
I think there's always fringe people out there, right? And today's social media, you get comments, but in the end, the values that we have are there, and they're more important than that. And I think again, we need to stand positive. So nothing that would change in any way what we believe in and what we're doing.
Do you have any more questions? We have a question in the middle, about halfway back over there. And we should also have a look at the poll results in a minute. So if you could get them ready, whoever the magic poll fairies are.
Thank you. My name is Ron Van Voorhees. I work for Siemens Healthcare in Terrytown. My question is to all of you. When you ask a company to move from embassy to advocacy, obviously there are risks. I think companies perceive they may lose customer base and market share. How do you sell that idea to your management team and get them to take that risk?
For me, at least, I take the view that over the long arc of time, nothing bad can come from standing for good. And if you're standing on, so I think you have to challenge people's moral compass, right? And say, are we standing on the right side of history or not? And then from there, you can be pragmatic or whatever, but you have to figure out which way is up, which way is north, and you start marching northwest or northeast at least, don't go south. And so I think it's super important just to define what's right in terms of for humanity, for human rights broadly. I love the conversation around Costa Rica. I thought I was really inspired by that, and just how important human rights, they take precedence over everything. That should be a core value for every institution, for-profit, nonprofit, government institution, educational institution. Human rights should come first, and everything else should come after that.
I think I just add that for us, for example, this agenda fits well with our company culture. So I think, for example, our company culture have 10 beliefs, 10 principles, and I think some of them involve transparency, authenticity, right, and individuals being empowered to go to their limit, right? So I think the agenda we're talking about here fits perfectly with our culture, right? So that's why we're so at ease talking about it and driving it, because it really is what we believe in.
Robin?
I would say that you start with the moral compass, You know, our CEO always says you do the right thing even when no one's looking. But then if that doesn't work, you go to the P&L and profit, and that always works. So you focus on the business strategy.
Thus speaks the Chief Investment Officer. Excellent. I'd like to just have a look at the results of the poll. So here were the two answers. It's multiple choice. When companies advocate for LGBT rights, do they genuinely care or is it just PR? Let's see what you said, and let's see what Twitter said. Can we see that? So Twitter, basically, it was 84% of people said it was just PR. So there's a lot of cynics on Twitter, you'll be surprised to hear. Who'd have thought? And here, the answer is very different, 72%. But this does, I mean, obviously Twitter polls taken with a very big pinch of salt. They're probably half of them are Russian bots or something. But I think this does, I think directionally, there is still a perception that, that some of this is being driven by PR. So what's the best, very quickly before we wrap up, what do you think is the best way of showing that this is genuine and sincere and not just driven by that? Any of you?
Consistency and action, those two things over time.
Short and sharp?
Yeah, not counting the cost of something, right? Saying, you know, well, this is X dollars of revenue, et cetera, if we take this position. You know, taking the right position, standing on the right side of history, and not in the moment, you know, counting the pennies and nickels.
And I would say just take real action. So hire executives that are gay and diverse, and so it's action speaks more loudly than words.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, thank you all very much. That's been a fascinating panel. Please join me in thanking David, Tony, and Robin. Thank you.